In the annals of human history, there are moments that defy all expectation, that shatter the established order and redefine what is possible. This is the story of such a moment. It begins not in a royal court or a hall of parliament, but in the sweltering heat of sugarcane fields, with the clanking of chains and the crack of the overseer's whip. It is the story of the most brutally exploited people on earth who, against impossible odds, seized their destiny in a blaze of fire and rebellion. Imagine a colony so rich it was called the Pearl of the Antilles, the single most valuable possession of any European empire. A place where 500,000 enslaved Africans toiled under a system of such calculated brutality that life expectancy was measured in a handful of years. This was French Saint-Domingue. And in 1791, the unthinkable happened. The enslaved rose up. They turned their tools of oppression, machetes, torches, and their own unbreakable will, against their masters. What followed was not a mere revolt, but a 13-year revolution, a complex and bloody war that would see former slaves defeat the finest armies of the age, the French, the British, and the Spanish. It was a conflict that would give the world military geniuses like Toussaint Louverture and the fierce, uncompromising Jean-Jacques Dessalines. It was a struggle that would force the world to confront the monstrous hypocrisy of slavery in an age of enlightenment. This is the epic of the Haitian Revolution. A story of how the quest for liberty, against all odds and logic, triumphed. It is a saga of profound courage, heartbreaking betrayal, and ultimate victory that gave birth to the first black republic in the world. A nation forged in the fires of resistance, whose very existence sent shockwaves across the globe and forever changed the course of history. This is how a people, written off as property, fought for and won their freedom, proving that the human spirit cannot be permanently enslaved. To understand the earthquake of the Haitian Revolution, we must first appreciate the powder keg it exploded from. That powder keg was the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the undisputed jewel of the Caribbean, and arguably the most valuable colony in the entire world. By the late 18th century, this small territory on the western half of the island of Hispaniola was not just an agricultural producer, it was an economic engine of staggering proportions. It was known as the Pearl of the Antilles, a title that glittered with wealth but was forged in unimaginable brutality. Saint-Domingue's success was a monstrous paradox. It supplied a staggering 40% of Europe's sugar and 60% of its coffee. Its ports swarmed with ships carrying indigo, cotton, and cocoa to the fashionable salons of Paris and the trading houses of London. The colony was a torrent of wealth flowing directly into the French treasury, financing empires and lifestyles a world away. But this immense prosperity had a single, horrifying source: the most brutally efficient slave society in human history. The entire economic structure was a pyramid of suffering, resting on the shoulders of nearly 500,000 enslaved Africans. They were not merely laborers, they were fuel, consumed to power the engine of European luxury. Life expectancy for a newly arrived African in the cane fields was often less than a decade. They were worked to exhaustion under the relentless sun, subjected to whippings, mutilations, and every form of psychological terror imaginable to maximize production. It was a system designed to break the human spirit, to reduce people to disposable machinery. The air, thick with the scent of crushed cane and fermenting molasses, was also thick with the scent of fear, sweat, and despair. This was not just a colony built on slavery, it was a civilization built on a human nightmare, where the immense wealth of the few was a direct measure of the profound misery of the many. This was the tinderbox, soaked in the blood and tears of hundreds of thousands, waiting only for a spark. The immense wealth and brutality of Saint-Domingue were not the only factors that made it a tinderbox. The colony was governed by a rigid, multi-layered caste system, a social hierarchy of meticulously defined and fiercely guarded racial categories. Understanding this complex pyramid of privilege and oppression is key, for it created a society where resentment festered at every level, turning each group against the other and making a unified front against the enslaved majority impossible for the ruling classes. At the very apex were the Grands Blancs, the big whites. This small, powerful elite consisted of the wealthy plantation owners, high-ranking officials, and wealthy merchants. They were the direct beneficiaries of the colony's staggering wealth, living in luxurious mansions and often acting as absentee landlords, viewing Saint-Domingue as a cash cow to be milked from the comfort of Paris. Beneath them were the Petits Blancs, or Little Whites. This group included artisans, shopkeepers, soldiers, and overseers. They were poor in property but rich in racial privilege, clinging to their white skin as their only claim to status above the free people of color, whom they often deeply resented. The most complex and pivotal group in this hierarchy were the gens de couleur libres, the free people of color. Numbering about 30,000, they were often the mixed-race children of white planters and enslaved African women. Many were wealthy, educated, and owned plantations and slaves themselves. Yet, despite their wealth and legal freedom, they were subjected to a humiliating regime of racial discrimination. They were barred from certain professions, forbidden from wearing European clothing, and could not vote or hold public office. They had a foot in both worlds but were fully accepted by neither, creating a deeply frustrated class with the resources and education to challenge the status quo. And at the base of this pyramid, supporting its entire crushing weight, were the nearly 500,000 enslaved Africans. They were legally considered property, mobiles or movables, with no rights whatsoever. This rigid caste system, designed to divide and conquer, ultimately created a society of intersecting grievances. The whites were divided by class, the free coloreds were embittered by prejudice, and the enslaved population suffered under unimaginable oppression. It was a perfect recipe for revolution, where the ambitions and anger of one group could, and would, ignite the fury of all. Beneath the surface of Saint-Domingue's glittering wealth and complex social hierarchy, the colony was, quite simply, a powder keg. And the explosive force within it was the systematic, calculated brutality of the slave regime itself. This was not merely a system of labor, it was a sophisticated apparatus of terror designed for one purpose, to maximize production through the absolute subjugation of human beings. The life of an enslaved person was a relentless cycle of exhaustion, violence, and psychological torment. On the sugar plantations, the heart of the colony's economy, the work was so grueling and the mortality so high that the enslaved population was not self-sustaining. Planters economically calculated that it was cheaper to work slaves to death and import new ones from Africa than to provide conditions that allowed for natural population growth. This constant influx of new arrivals, known as boss sales, was crucial. They carried with them the unextinguished fire of freedom from their homelands and memories of warrior traditions, alongside a deep, visceral hatred for the system that had stolen them. The tools of control were omnipresent. The whip, the chain, the iron collar, and the branding iron were not just punishments, they were symbols of a world order where one race was deemed property of another. Executions and tortures were made into public spectacles, burnings, breakings on the wheel, hangings, designed to terrorize the population into submission. Yet, in a tragic irony, this very brutality forged an unyielding resistance. The constant threat of death can strip a person of the fear of it. With nothing left to lose, the desire for liberty, or death in its pursuit, became a rational choice. This simmering resentment was not confined to the enslaved. The Petits Blancs seethed with class envy, while the wealthy gens de couleur chafed under the humiliating racial codes that denied them the status their wealth should have commanded. Saint-Domingue was a society where every group, save for the tiny elite at the very top, had a powerful grievance. The plantation may have been an engine of immense profit, but it was also a factory producing its own gravediggers. All it needed was a spark to ignite, and the entire oppressive structure would be consumed in the ensuing fire. The powder keg was primed, the fuse laid. And in 1789, the spark arrived from an unexpected quarter, across the vast expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, from the very heart of the French Empire itself. The French Revolution erupted, toppling the old monarchy and sending shockwaves through the foundations of the Western world. In the halls of the National Assembly in Paris, new, radical ideas were being proclaimed: liberté, égalité, fraternité, liberty, equality, fraternity. These words, echoing from the debates in Europe, landed in the supercharged atmosphere of Saint-Domingue with the force of a hurricane, and every social group heard them through the filter of their own aspirations and grievances. For the wealthy Grands Blancs, the revolutionary talk of liberty was not about freeing slaves, but about their own economic liberty. They saw an opportunity to break free from the mercantilist restrictions of the mother country and gain greater autonomy to run their profitable plantation system as they saw fit. For the Petits Blancs, the call for equality was a battle cry against the privileged Grands Blancs. They demanded more political power and social standing within the white community. Most dangerously of all, the gens de couleur libres, the free people of color, seized upon the principle of fraternity. They argued, with powerful logic, that the rights of man must apply to all free men, regardless of skin color. They sent delegates to Paris, petitioning the National Assembly to grant them the full citizenship they were denied. Yet, there was a fourth, silent audience for these revolutionary slogans: the enslaved majority. They overheard the heated arguments in the port cities and on the plantations. The concepts of rights, freedom, and resisting tyranny were not abstract philosophical concepts. They were a language that gave name to their deepest, most desperate yearning. The white colonists and free people of color were, in effect, debating the principles of revolution in front of a captive audience who were about to take those principles more seriously than anyone could have imagined. The French Revolution had handed a moral and political weapon to every oppressed group in the colony, but it was the enslaved who would ultimately wield it with the most devastating and revolutionary consequences, turning the ideals of the Parisian bourgeoisie into a bloody war for universal emancipation. As the revolutionary fervor from France took hold, Saint-Domingue did not unite, it fractured. The grand ideals of liberty, equality, fraternity were not a unifying call, but a prism that shattered into 1,000 conflicting interests. Each group, armed with the new language of rights, began a fierce and chaotic struggle to redefine the colony's social contract entirely in their own favor. The Grands Blancs, the wealthy white planters, were the first to act. Interpreting liberty as commercial and political independence, they seized control of local colonial assemblies and effectively began governing autonomously from France, dreaming of a prosperous slave-holding republic akin to the nascent United States. Simultaneously, the Petits Blancs, the poor white artisans, shopkeepers, and overseers, mobilized. For them, equality meant tearing down the privileges of the Grands Blancs. They formed their own radical political clubs and militias, demanding a true white democracy where their voice mattered as much as that of any wealthy planter. This intra-white conflict created a power vacuum and an atmosphere of violent political instability. Into this fray stepped the gens de couleur libres, the free people of color. Watching the two white factions fight each other, they saw their moment. They presented their case with impeccable logic. They were free, they were often wealthy and educated, and they were loyal to France. The revolution's principles, they insisted, must guarantee them full political rights and an end to the humiliating racial codes. In a bold move, they found a sympathetic ear in the more radical faction of the National Assembly in Paris. But on the ground in Saint-Domingue, both the Grands and Petits Blancs were united on one thing: their vehement opposition to granting any rights to people of color. This bitter, three-way political struggle between competing free factions created a crucial window of opportunity. It demonstrated that the ruling class was deeply divided and distracted. For the enslaved majority, watching from the sidelines, the message was clear: the masters were at each other's throats, their authority was crumbling, and the time for their own, far more radical demand, not for rights within the system, but for the absolute destruction of the system itself, was swiftly approaching. While the free elites of Saint-Domingue were locked in their political debates in well-lit assembly halls, a far more profound and fateful meeting was taking place in the darkness of a secluded forest, known as Bois Cayman. In the sweltering August night of 1791, hundreds of enslaved Africans gathered under the cover of a raging storm. This was not a political debate, it was a sacred and strategic war council, a moment where faith, fury, and freedom converged. At its center was a Vodou priest named Boukman Dudi, a commanding figure whose voice carried the weight of ancestral rage and divine sanction. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the intensity of the ceremony. Vodou, a spiritual synthesis of their African roots and their harsh new world, provided the cultural glue and the revolutionary fervor. It was a force the planters had dismissed as mere superstition, but which now became the engine of insurrection. In a powerful prayer that has echoed through history, Boukman invoked the God of the oppressed. The God who created the sun which gives us light, who holds up the ocean, this God who watches over us, orders us to revenge our wrongs. This was a declaration of a holy war, a call to action sanctioned by a higher power that saw their suffering. The ceremony reached its climax with a symbolic act that bound the conspirators together in an unbreakable pact. According to accounts, a wild pig was sacrificed, and its blood was drunk by the attendees, sealing their oath to destroy their oppressors or perish in the attempt. The Bois Cayman ceremony was the point of no return. It transformed the simmering, isolated discontent of the enslaved into a unified, organized, and spiritually galvanized movement. It provided the leadership, the divine justification, and the concrete plan. The political arguments in Le Cap were now irrelevant. The real revolution was being born not in a chamber of debate, but in the heart of the forest, in a storm, sealed with a sacred oath and the taste of freedom, which was now worth more than life itself. The fuse lit at Bois Cayman would, within days, set the entire northern plain of Saint-Domingue ablaze. The sacred oath sworn in the darkness of Bois Cayman did not take long to manifest in a storm of fire and blood. Just a week after the ceremony, on the night of August 22, 1791, the long-suppressed fury of an entire people exploded across the fertile northern plain of Saint-Domingue. It began not as a single, coordinated army, but as a spontaneous and terrifying wave of liberation, sweeping from plantation to plantation. The enslaved, armed with the tools of their own oppression, cane knives, axes, and torches, turned the colony's greatest assets into instruments of its destruction. The scene was one of apocalyptic vengeance. The night sky glowed an ominous orange as hundreds of plantation mansions, sugar refineries, and cane fields were set ablaze. The meticulously ordered world of the planters, built on the illusion of total control, was systematically dismantled in a single night of unimaginable violence. This was not a protest, it was a war of extermination against the slave-owning class. For years, the planters had used terror to maintain order. Now, that terror was being turned back upon them with a ferocity they could never have conceived. The revolt spread with viral speed, its leaders, like Jean-François Papillon and Georges Biassou, who had been at Bois Cayman, channeling the initial chaos into a burgeoning military force. Within weeks, the heart of the French colony's wealth was a smoldering ruin. Over 1,000 plantations were destroyed, and tens of thousands of enslaved people had joined the rebellion. The white population, gripped by panic, fled to the relative safety of the fortified port city of Le Cap, but not before thousands had been killed. The uprising of 1791 was a declaration, louder and more visceral than any political manifesto. The enslaved would no longer negotiate for their freedom, they would take it by force. The conflict was no longer a debate among free men about rights and privileges. It was now a total war for the very soul of Saint-Domingue, a brutal struggle between the unshakable will to be free and the desperate determination to maintain a dying world of privilege. The Pearl of the Antilles was now a battlefield. Out of the fiery chaos of the initial uprising, a new kind of leader began to emerge, one whose vision would eclipse the rebellion's initial, vengeful fury and transform it into a sophisticated revolution. His name was Toussaint Breda, a man in his 40s who had been born into slavery but possessed the strategic mind of a born statesman and the tactical genius of a veteran general. Initially, he served as a medic and advisor to the rebel leaders Biassou and Jean-François, but it quickly became apparent that his talents were destined for command. He was a complex, almost contradictory figure, a formerly enslaved man who was literate, a devout Catholic who understood the power of voodoo, and a pragmatist in a war driven by passion. What set Toussaint apart was his profound understanding that a successful rebellion required more than just rage. It required discipline, diplomacy, and a clear political objective. He began to drill his followers into a formidable and disciplined fighting force, earning him the nickname L'Ouverture, the opening, for his ability to find openings in the enemy's lines. While other rebel leaders were focused on local victories, Toussaint was playing a grand, geopolitical chess game. He recognized the immense power of the European empires vying for control of the colony and saw an opportunity to use their rivalries to his advantage. He first allied his forces with the Spanish monarchy in the eastern part of the island, who were eager to arm the rebels to undermine their French rivals. As a commander in the Spanish army, he honed his skills and expanded his influence. But Toussaint's loyalty was never to Spain or any foreign crown, it was solely to the cause of emancipation. He was waiting for the right moment, the right opening, to pivot his strategy and secure a future for his people. He was not merely a freedom fighter, he was a nation builder in the making, a man who understood that true liberation meant not just defeating the master on the battlefield, but also outmaneuvering him in the halls of power. The fiery rebellion had found its brilliant, calculating mind. The period following the Great Uprising was not a simple war between enslaved rebels and their French masters. Instead, Saint-Domingue descended into a brutal and chaotic multi-sided conflict, a bloody free-for-all where alliances were temporary, and today's enemy could be tomorrow's reluctant ally. The colony became a tangled web of intersecting wars, each faction fighting for a vastly different vision of the future. In the north and west, the armies of the enslaved rebels, now led by emerging generals like Toussaint Louverture, Jean-François, and Biassou, waged a relentless guerrilla war. But they were not a monolith, they were divided in their strategies and allegiances, with some, like Toussaint, fighting under the Spanish flag, while others had their own autonomous commands. Simultaneously, the French Republican forces, representing the revolutionary government in Paris, were fighting on multiple fronts. They battled the slave rebels in the hills while also fending off invasions from two foreign empires. To the east, the Spanish monarchy, seeing a chance to cripple its French rival and seize the wealthy colony, provided weapons, supplies, and official commissions to the rebel armies, including Toussaint's. From the west and the south, the British Empire, a perennial enemy of France and a major slave power itself, launched a massive invasion. Their goal was twofold: to grab the Pearl of the Antilles for themselves and to crush a slave rebellion that threatened to inspire their own enslaved populations in Jamaica and elsewhere. Amidst this, The white French colonists were themselves fractured between royalists loyal to the old monarchy and republicans loyal to the new government in Paris. This bewildering complexity meant that the battlefield was constantly shifting. A French Republican soldier might find himself fighting a royalist French planter, a British redcoat, a Spanish soldier, and a slave rebel, all in the same week. It was in this cauldron of conflicting ambitions that Toussaint Louverture's genius for strategy and realpolitik would be forged, as he carefully watched the great powers tear each other apart, waiting for the perfect moment to strike for his people's ultimate goal. As the flames of rebellion consumed the interior of Saint-Domingue, the chaos did not go unnoticed by the other great European powers. For the empires of Spain and Britain, the turmoil in France's richest colony was not a tragedy, but a once-in-a-generation strategic opportunity. They saw a chance to cripple their revolutionary French rival and seize the lucrative prize for themselves, moving in to carve up the wounded beast. From the east, the Spanish monarchy, which controlled the neighboring colony of Saint-Domingue, saw a perfect chance to strike. Their approach was one of cunning proxy warfare. They began supplying the rebel armies of Toussaint Louverture, Jean-François, and Biassou with weapons, ammunition, and even official commissions in the Spanish army. To the Spanish, these rebel leaders were a useful tool to bleed the French dry, a temporary alliance of convenience with no long-term commitment to the cause of emancipation. Simultaneously, from the sea, came an even more direct and formidable threat, the British Empire. Alarmed by the radical nature of the slave revolt and fearing it would inspire similar uprisings in their own valuable Caribbean colonies like Jamaica, the British decided to intervene. But their motivation was twofold: to contain the contagion of Black Revolution and to outright annex Saint-Domingue for the crown. In 1793, a powerful British invasion force landed, swiftly capturing key port cities in the south and west, including the strategic strongholds of Jérémie and Port-au-Prince. For many white French colonists, terrified of the rebel armies and the radical government in Paris, the British invaders appeared not as enemies, but as saviors, a conservative force that would restore slavery and the old social order. Thus, the conflict escalated from a colonial rebellion into a complex international war. The enslaved rebels now found themselves fighting not only their former French masters but also the professional armies of two of the world's most powerful empires, all while navigating the treacherous, shifting alliances between them. It was in this dizzying geopolitical labyrinth that Toussaint Louverture would make his most critical and calculated decision yet. By 1794, Toussaint Louverture found himself at a strategic crossroads. He was a general in the Spanish army, fighting effectively against the French, but he was growing increasingly wary of his allies. The Spanish, a staunchly monarchist and slave-holding power, had no genuine interest in the permanent emancipation of the enslaved population. They were merely using the rebellion as a weapon against France. Toussaint understood that once the Spanish achieved their goals, they would inevitably seek to reimpose the very slavery his people had fought to destroy. His forces were a means to an end for Madrid, and that end was incompatible with his own. It was then that a seismic event from Paris reshaped the entire political landscape of the Caribbean. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the spiraling situation in Saint-Domingue, the French National Convention, under the influence of the radical Jacobins and swayed by lobbying from French abolitionists, took a monumental step. On February 4, 1794, they issued a decree that officially abolished slavery throughout all French territories. This was not a tactical move in a colonial war, it was a fundamental principle of the revolution now being applied universally. For Toussaint, this changed everything. The French Republic, his former enemy, had now formally embraced the core objective of his revolution. After a period of careful deliberation, he made his audacious gambit. In May 1794, Toussaint dramatically switched sides, abandoning the Spanish and aligning his formidable army with the French Republic. He declared that he was now fighting for France, but on his own terms. His famous proclamation stated, "I am Toussaint Louverture. My name is perhaps known to you. I have undertaken vengeance. I want liberty and equality to reign in Saint-Domingue." This was not an act of submission, but one of supreme strategic mastery. He now fought under a legal framework that recognized emancipation, granting his cause international legitimacy. He used the authority of the French Republic to expel the Spanish from the territory they had occupied and to turn the tide decisively against the British invaders. In one brilliant move, he had outmaneuvered both imperial powers, transforming his rebellion from a faction in a civil war into the official army of the French state in Saint-Domingue, all while never wavering from his ultimate goal, securing freedom for his people. With the moral and legal authority of the French Republic now behind him, Toussaint Louverture embarked on a breathtaking campaign to unify Saint-Domingue under his sole command. His switch to the French cause was not an end, but a new beginning, the start of a brilliant, methodical ascent to becoming the de facto ruler of the colony. His first order of business was to prove his value to his new allies. He turned his disciplined legions, now officially the French Republican Army, against his former sponsors. He relentlessly drove the Spanish forces back across the border, ultimately forcing Spain to cede its side of the island to France in the 1795 Treaty of Basel. With the Eastern Front secured, he then focused his fury on the British. For 5 grueling years, he waged a war of attrition against the powerful British Expeditionary Force, whose troops were decimated as much by yellow fever as by Toussaint's guerrilla tactics. By 1798, exhausted and bankrupt, the British were forced to negotiate a withdrawal directly with Toussaint, a stunning acknowledgement of his supreme authority. With the foreign invaders expelled, Toussaint now turned his attention to internal rivals. He moved decisively against other autonomous black generals, like his former co-commander, André Rigaud, in the War of the Knives, crushing the mixed-race faction and consolidating his control over the entire colony. By 1801, Saint-Domingue was his. He was the undisputed master of the island, having even annexed Spanish Santo Domingo to unify Hispaniola. To formalize this new reality, he took his most audacious step yet. He drafted his own constitution. This document declared him governor for life with the power to choose his successor, abolished slavery forever, and reaffirmed Saint-Domingue's allegiance to France, but as a largely autonomous entity. He had created, in all but name, an independent nation. Toussaint was no longer just a general, he was a statesman, ruling over a free black society and tirelessly working to rebuild its shattered economy, even attempting to revive plantation agriculture with paid labor. He had achieved the impossible, but his greatest challenge was yet to come, from the very nation he claimed to serve. By 1801, Toussaint Louverture stood at the zenith of his power. He had expelled foreign armies, unified the island of Hispaniola, and pacified internal rivals. Saint-Domingue was, for the first time in a decade, at peace. But it was a peace enforced by his will alone. To transform his military authority into a lasting political structure, Toussaint undertook his most revolutionary act since leading armies. He drafted a constitution. This was not a request for permission from Paris, it was a bold declaration of a new political reality. The 1801 Constitution for Saint-Domingue was a masterpiece of political daring and a foundational document for a new kind of nation. Its most radical article was its first and most non-negotiable principle: there cannot exist slaves on this territory, servitude is therein forever abolished. This permanently etched the revolution's core achievement into law. The Constitution then meticulously laid out the governance of the colony, and at its center was a single, powerful office, governor for life. The document named Toussaint Louverture to this position, granting him the absolute authority to rule, to make laws, and to even choose his own successor. While it paid lip service to Saint-Domingue remaining a French colony, it effectively declared it a sovereign state. All laws from France would only apply if they did not contradict this new constitution, making Toussaint the final arbiter of the colony's destiny. He had outmaneuvered every opponent on the battlefield and now sought to cement his victories in ink and law. He was creating a functioning, free black state, and he used this constitution to rebuild the economy, even reintroducing plantation labor, though now with wages, to restore the colony's prosperity. In his mind, he had not betrayed France, he had saved it for itself, creating a prosperous, autonomous partner. But in Paris, a man who would tolerate no rivals saw this not as an act of statesmanship, but as an act of defiance. The Constitution of 1801 was Toussaint's crowning achievement, but it was also the document that would seal his fate and plunge the island back into war. As Toussaint Louverture governed his autonomous state in the Caribbean, a storm was gathering on the other side of the Atlantic. In Paris, Napoleon Bonaparte had consolidated his power as first consul of France. Ambitious, victorious in Europe, and seeking to restore a vast global French empire, he looked westward with a calculating eye. To Napoleon, Saint-Domingue was not a beacon of revolutionary freedom, it was a lost asset of immense value, and Toussaint's 1801 constitution was an act of intolerable insubordination. The idea of a self-governing black republic, led by a former slave, was an affront to his imperial vision and a dangerous example to other slave colonies. Napoleon's plan was audacious and twofold. He intended to reassert direct French control over Saint-Domingue, crush Toussaint's government, and, most catastrophically, re-establish slavery. He was swayed by lobbying from exiled white planters who promised the restoration of the colony's former prosperity, which, in their view, depended entirely on the reinstitution of forced labor. Furthermore, as part of his grand design for a new French empire in the Americas, which included the recent acquisition of the Louisiana Territory from Spain, Napoleon saw a pacified and profitable Saint-Domingue as an essential naval and economic hub. A free Haiti had no place in this vision. In late 1801, he assembled the largest naval expedition ever to sail for the Americas. Under the command of his brother-in-law, General Charles Leclerc, a fleet of dozens of warships carrying over 20,000 of France's finest veteran troops set sail. Their orders were deceptively simple: to arrive under a false flag of peace, ostensibly as allies to stabilize the colony, but with secret instructions to disarm the black population, arrest all the black officers, and once their leadership was decapitated, systematically re-enslave the people. The freedom that had been won with over a decade of bloodshed was now in the crosshairs of the most powerful man in Europe. The final, and most brutal, war for the soul of Haiti was about to begin. In February 1802, the French Armada appeared off the coast of Saint-Domingue. It was a sight designed to inspire terror and awe, a floating city of war, carrying the battle-hardened legions that had conquered Europe. Initially, General Leclerc played a careful game of deception, presenting himself as a friendly force coming to uphold the authority of the French Republic. He promised Toussaint Louverture and his generals that their ranks and freedom would be honored. But Toussaint was wary, and his suspicions were soon confirmed as French troops began to land and occupy key coastal cities. The war that followed was one of unprecedented brutality, even for a conflict already steeped in blood. Leclerc's strategy was one of overwhelming force and psychological terror. He ordered his troops to crush resistance without mercy, executing any black soldiers found with weapons and massacring civilians suspected of supporting the rebellion. Toussaint, along with his brilliant generals Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Henri Christophe, understood they could not defeat this professional army in open, conventional battle. Instead, they retreated to the rugged mountains and dense forests they knew so well, waging a devastating guerrilla war. They burned towns and destroyed supplies, denying the French any comfort or sustenance from the land, adopting a scorched earth policy of breathtaking sacrifice. They would rather see the colony in ashes than return to slavery. The fighting was fierce and costly for both sides. The French, though superior in training and equipment, were lured into ambushes and cut down by an enemy that seemed to melt into the landscape. For months, the war was a bloody stalemate. Toussaint's forces inflicted heavy casualties, but the relentless pressure from the massive French expedition began to take its toll. Key fortresses fell, and several of Toussaint's own commanders, believing the cause was lost, began to defect to the French side. Facing encirclement and the potential annihilation of his army, Toussaint was forced into a difficult decision: to lay down his arms and negotiate, hoping to preserve the core ideal of freedom, even if his own personal power was diminished. It was a calculated risk, born of a desperate situation. By the spring of 1802, a tense and fragile ceasefire had settled over parts of Saint-Domingue. Having been worn down by the relentless French campaign and the defection of some of his key officers, Toussaint Louverture made the fateful decision to retire from the fight. He withdrew to his plantation at Innery, hoping to preserve what he could of his people's freedom through a negotiated peace, even if it meant his own withdrawal from power. But for General Leclerc and Napoleon, this was not enough. Toussaint, even in retirement, was a symbol and a potential rallying point. His very existence was a threat to their ultimate goal of re-enslavement. They needed him removed, permanently. The trap was set with cynical precision. In June 1802, Toussaint was invited by a French general, Jean-Baptiste Brunet, to a meeting in the town of Georges to discuss matters of state. The invitation promised safe passage under a flag of truce, a sacred tenet of European warfare. Trusting in this code of honor, Toussaint arrived with a small escort. But as he entered the house, French soldiers swarmed in, overpowering him and his men. There was to be no discussion, no negotiation. It was an outright abduction. Toussaint was bound and rushed to the coast, where a waiting warship, the Creole, transported him with haste across the Atlantic. He was taken to a remote, frigid fortress in the Jura Mountains of eastern France, the Fort de Dieu. This was a place designed to break men. He was thrown into a damp, stone cell, deprived of heat, adequate food, and any human comfort. Isolated from the sun and the world he had shaped, the architect of Haiti's freedom was systematically erased. He was never charged with a crime, never given a trial. He was a prisoner of state, and his captivity was the key that Napoleon believed would lock the chains of slavery back onto Saint-Domingue. But in removing Toussaint, they had not secured their victory, they had created a martyr and unleashed a fury far more terrible and uncompromising than any they had yet faced. In the wake of Toussaint Louverture's treacherous capture, a chilling silence fell over Saint-Domingue. But it was the silence before the storm. General Leclerc, believing the backbone of the resistance was broken, began to enact the secret, second phase of Napoleon's orders. The mask of French republicanism was cast aside, revealing the grim face of imperial restoration beneath. Across the colony, in areas they controlled, French officials began to disarm the black population. Then, with cold bureaucratic efficiency, they started to reintroduce the slave labor system on plantations, effectively nullifying the 1794 Emancipation Decree. The unthinkable was happening. The freedom for which they had fought and bled for over a decade was being systematically stolen from them. This was the moment of profound and terrible clarity for every black and mixed-race person in Saint-Domingue. The French were not there as allies or liberators. They were there as conquerors, and their goal was to turn back time, to erase the revolution itself. The betrayal was absolute. It united the fractured factions of the colony as never before. The remaining black generals, particularly the fierce and pragmatic Jean-Jacques Dessalines and the mixed-race leader Alexander Pétion, who had previously been at odds, now found a common, existential cause. They understood that this was no longer a political struggle for autonomy within the French Empire. This was now a war of survival, a fight to the death, for to be defeated was to be re-enslaved. The conflict was transformed. It was no longer Toussaint's war of strategic maneuvering, it became Dessalines' war of extermination. The goal was simple, brutal, and absolute, to drive the French from the island forever, and to ensure that no power would ever again threaten to impose the chains of slavery on the soil of Haiti. The spark of righteous fury, once lit at Bois Cayman, was now a raging inferno, fueled by the ultimate betrayal. The Haitian Revolution had entered its final, and most bloody, chapter. With Toussaint Louverture imprisoned in France and Napoleon's true, genocidal intentions laid bare, the fight for Saint-Domingue needed new leaders, ones whose resolve would be as absolute and unforgiving as the threat they faced. From the ashes of betrayal, two formidable figures emerged to take up the mantle, Jean-Jacques Dessalines and Alexander Pétion. Dessalines, a former slave and Toussaint's most ferocious lieutenant, was a commander known for his iron will and his ruthless, often brutal, dedication to victory. He had witnessed the French treachery firsthand and vowed that there would be no more negotiations, no more truces. The only path forward was total war. His partner in this final struggle was Alexander Pétion, a leader of the free people of color, educated and a skilled artillery officer. Pétion and Dessalines had once been bitter enemies during the War of the Knives, a civil war between the black and mixed-race factions. But Napoleon's attempt to re-enslave them all erased those old divisions. The shared existential threat forged an unbreakable, if pragmatic, alliance. Pétion brought his disciplined troops and military expertise to Dessalines' cause, uniting the two most powerful remaining armies on the island against their common foe. Together, they represented a complete fusion of the revolution's forces, the raw, unstoppable fury of the formerly enslaved and the strategic skill of the educated free-colored class. Dessalines, now the supreme commander, channeled this unified rage into a new kind of warfare. He adopted a scorched earth policy of breathtaking severity, ordering the burning of towns, plantations, and fields to deny the French any resources. He famously told his troops, "Coupe tête, boule quai." Cut off heads, burn houses. This was not mere sabotage, it was a statement of total commitment. They would rather see the entire colony reduced to ashes than be returned to chains. Under this unified and merciless command, the indigenous army, as they now called themselves, began to turn the tide, pushing the beleaguered French forces into a desperate and bloody retreat. As the unified indigenous army under Dessalines and Pétion waged its relentless campaign, a silent, invisible ally fought alongside them, decimating the European invaders with an efficiency no army could match. This was yellow fever, the dreaded yellow jack or vomito negro, a mosquito-borne virus for which the French soldiers had no immunity. The very environment of Saint-Domingue, the tropical climate that had once enriched France through the sweat of enslaved laborers, now became its graveyard. The virus swept through the French ranks like a scythe, striking down thousands of Napoleon's finest troops. Men who had survived battles across Europe would find themselves succumbing to a horrific death within days, their bodies racked with fever, turning a characteristic yellow from jaundice before bleeding internally. The psychological impact was as devastating as the physical toll. Morale collapsed as soldiers watched their comrades die in agony, far from any battlefield. The French army was not just being defeated, it was being erased by an enemy it could not see or fight. This biological catastrophe crippled French military capacity. They lost the manpower to garrison towns, mount effective campaigns, or even maintain their supply lines. Critically, the fever also claimed the commander of the expedition, General Charles Leclerc, in November 1802. His death was a massive strategic blow and a symbolic victory for the Haitian cause. His replacement, the vicious General Donatien de Rochambeau, resorted to even more extreme acts of terror, but he was fighting a losing battle against both the indigenous army and the epidemic. While the Haitian forces, many of whom had developed immunity from a lifetime in the region, were also affected, the fever disproportionately ravaged the newly arrived Europeans. It was the great equalizer, neutralizing French numerical and technological superiority. Yellow fever did not win the war for Haiti. That victory was earned by the courage and sacrifice of its people, but it irrevocably broke the back of the French expeditionary force, ensuring that when the final, decisive battle came at Verdières, it was against a hollowed-out and desperate enemy. By November 1803, the stage was set for the final, decisive confrontation. The French forces, ravaged by disease and relentless guerrilla attacks, were bottled up in their last major stronghold, the port city of Cap-Français. Between them and total victory for the Haitian Revolution stood the French fortifications at Verdières, just south of the city. On November 18, General Jean-Jacques Dessalines ordered the assault. The Battle of Verdières was not a skirmish, it was the climactic fury of a 13-year revolution, a deliberate, head-on attack against a demoralized but still dangerous enemy. Dessalines' strategy was a masterful display of coordinated force. He launched wave after wave of attacks against the fortified French positions. The fighting was ferocious, some of the most intense of the entire war. But what truly broke the French will was the breathtaking courage and improvisation of the Haitian soldiers. In a legendary act of valor, a Haitian battalion led by General François Capoy, known as Capoy la Mort, charged directly into a storm of French cannon and musket fire. When a bullet shot his hat off, he paused, picked it up, bowed to the French lines in a gesture of supreme defiance, and continued his charge, urging his men forward. This act of almost supernatural bravery became the defining moment of the battle, symbolizing the unyielding spirit of the indigenous army. The Haitian troops, fighting with a conviction the conscripted French soldiers could not match, overwhelmed the defenses. By nightfall, the French lines had crumbled. General Rochambeau, recognizing the futility of further resistance, signaled his surrender. The battle was over. The victory was total. In a single day, the Haitian army had shattered the last major field force of Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had conquered Europe. The path to the Cap was now open, and the road to national independence was cleared. The Battle of Verdières was more than a military victory, it was the moment a people seized their destiny with unwavering hands, proving on a bloody field that freedom, once demanded by the soul of a nation, is unstoppable. Just weeks after the decisive victory at Verdières, the leaders and people of the new nation gathered in the port city of Gonâves. The date was January 1, 1804. There were no lavish celebrations, no grand balls. The air was thick with the memory of unimaginable sacrifice and the grim resolve born from betrayal. This was not a party, it was a sacred declaration of a hard-won existence. At the center of it all stood Jean-Jacques Dessalines. He held in his hands the final, irrevocable document that would sever the chain linking them to France forever, the Act of Independence. Dessalines' voice, sharp and resonant, did not speak of reconciliation or a shared future with Europe. Instead, it was a voice of vengeance and eternal severance. He began by formally renouncing the name Saint-Domingue, a label that symbolized their bondage. In its place, he resurrected the indigenous Taino name for the island, Haiti, meaning land of high mountains. This was a symbolic act of reclaiming their home, rooting it in a history that predated European conquest. The declaration itself was a raw, uncompromising indictment of French cruelty and a vow of eternal liberty. "We have dared to be free," it proclaimed, "let us be so by ourselves and for ourselves." It called for the expulsion of any remaining French citizens and swore that the Haitian people would rather die than live under French dominion again. Most powerfully, it made an oath to posterity, to the entire world, and to history itself: never again shall a colonist or European set foot on this soil as a master or landowner. In that moment, the world's first black republic was born. It was a nation conceived not in a peaceful transfer of power, but in the crucible of history's only successful slave revolution. The Declaration was their collective scream to the world that they were, and would forever be, a free people. The promise of liberty, first whispered in the forests of Bois Cayman, was now etched into the foundation of a new nation. The Declaration of Independence was a moment of unparalleled triumph, but as the echoes of celebration faded, a profound and sobering silence descended upon Haiti. The price of their freedom had been paid in a currency of almost unimaginable human suffering. The land itself bore the scars of the 13-year conflict. Plantation mansions were skeletal ruins, fields once teeming with sugarcane were now overgrown with weeds, and the infrastructure of the once wealthiest colony in the world was utterly shattered. But the true cost was measured not in charred timber or lost revenue, but in lives. The demographic catastrophe was staggering. When the revolution began in 1791, the population of Saint-Domingue was estimated to be around 520,000 people, 500,000 enslaved Africans, 20,000 free people of color, and roughly 40,000 white colonists. By the end of the war in 1804, the population had been horrifically reduced. It is estimated that over 150,000 black Haitians and 70,000 French soldiers, colonists, and British invaders had lost their lives. In some estimates, nearly half the pre-war population had perished from violence, disease, and the hardships of war. An entire generation had been defined by conflict. The white colonial population was almost entirely gone, killed or fled. The survivors, now citizens of Haiti, were a people forged in the crucible of a war of extermination. They were free, but they were also traumatized, grieving, and facing the Herculean task of building a new society from the ashes, surrounded by a hostile world that viewed their very existence as a threat. The victory was absolute, but the victory party was a quiet, somber affair. They had won their freedom, but they had paid for it with the blood of fathers, mothers, sons, and daughters. The new nation was born not in innocence, but in a baptism of fire, and the memory of that sacrifice would forever be woven into the soul of the Haitian people. The birth of Haiti in 1804 was not merely a national event, it was a world historical earthquake that sent seismic shockwaves across the globe, fundamentally challenging the prevailing world order. In an age dominated by European empires built on conquest and racial subjugation, the very existence of a free black republic, founded by formerly enslaved people, was an unthinkable, terrifying, and inspirational anomaly. For the first time in modern history, a slave rebellion had not been crushed, it had succeeded in establishing a sovereign nation. This fact alone made Haiti a potent symbol and a dangerous precedent. In the slave-holding societies of the Americas, the name Haiti became a whisper of hope for the enslaved and a specter of dread for the slave owner. In the United States, Southern planters lived in terror that the Haitian example would inspire their own enslaved populations. This fear directly influenced American foreign policy and domestic security for decades, leading to a refusal to recognize Haitian independence until 1862. Similarly, in the Caribbean and South America, colonial authorities tightened their grip, terrified of the revolutionary contagion. But for leaders like Simón Bolívar, the liberator of northern South America, Haiti was a crucial ally. When he was driven into exile, it was Haiti that gave him sanctuary, arms, and supplies on the condition that he promised to abolish slavery in the territories he liberated. Haiti thus directly contributed to the end of slavery in the Spanish-American Wars of Independence. The new nation stood as a living, breathing refutation of the racist ideologies used to justify slavery. It proved that black people were not inherently inferior, they were capable of self-governance, military genius, and profound sacrifice for liberty. The world's first black republic was a beacon, illuminating the path to freedom and forcing the entire Atlantic world to confront the brutal, unsustainable hypocrisy of a system that preached liberty while practicing bondage. With independence secured, Haiti faced its next monumental task, defining itself. The answer came in the Constitution of 1805, a document so radical and defiant that it sought to legally and philosophically erase the very foundations of the old colonial order. Crafted under the firm hand of Emperor Jacques I, formerly Jean-Jacques Dessalines, this was not merely a set of laws, it was a manifesto for a new world, a deliberate and profound inversion of the racist ideologies that had justified slavery. Its first and most fundamental article was a declaration of existence: the emperor, and his successors, are to be chosen by the Council of State. The crown is elective and not hereditary. But the true revolution was in Article 12, which stated, "No white man, of whatever nation he may be, shall put his foot on this territory with the title of master or proprietor." This was a permanent ban on foreign white land ownership, a direct safeguard against the return of the plantation system. Most astonishingly, Article 14 tackled the complex issue of race head-on. In a world obsessed with racial hierarchy and blood quantum, the Constitution declared, all distinctions of color among the children of one and the same family, of whom the chief magistrate is the father, being necessarily to cease, the Haitians shall henceforth be known only by the generic appellation of blacks. This was a masterstroke of political and social engineering. It legally defined all Haitian citizens, regardless of their actual skin tone, from the darkest African to the lightest-skinned Ancien Libre, as black. This was a powerful act of national unity, forging a single identity from the diverse groups that had fought the revolution, and rejecting the color-based caste system of colonialism. The Constitution also forever abolished slavery, making it the first nation in the Americas to permanently outlaw it in its foundational law. It was a bold, unprecedented experiment in creating a nation built not on ethnicity or the divine right of kings, but on the shared experience of oppression and the universal right to freedom. The cannons had fallen silent, but a new, more insidious war against Haiti had just begun, a war of isolation. The birth of the world's first black republic sent a shockwave of fear through the slave-holding powers of the Atlantic world. To recognize Haiti was to legitimize a slave revolution, a notion that threatened the very economic and social foundations of empires and nations built on bondage. Consequently, the great powers imposed a diplomatic and economic cordon sanitaire, a sanitary cordon, around the new nation, designed not to protect the world from disease, but to contain the contagion of black freedom and, they hoped, strangle the infant republic in its cradle. The United States, a nation born from its own revolution, refused to recognize Haitian independence for nearly 6 decades, fearing it would inspire rebellion among its own massive enslaved population and upset the political balance between slave and free states. Great Britain, though a rival of France, was a major slave trading power and would not grant formal recognition until 1833. Even Simon Bolivar, whom Haiti had aided, turned his back once he gained power, refusing to invite Haiti to the Pan American Congress of Nations for fear of alienating slave-holding allies. This diplomatic quarantine had a devastating economic impact. Without formal recognition, Haiti was locked out of international trade and finance. It could not secure loans for rebuilding, and its merchants faced immense difficulties. This forced the nation into a state of defensive autonomy, but it also crippled its ability to recover from the ruins of its war for independence. The world, which had profited immensely from Haiti's enslaved labor, now punished it for seizing its freedom. This imposed isolation became a defining feature of Haiti's early history, a heavy price paid for its audacious claim to liberty and sovereignty in a world that was not ready for it. Just 2 decades after winning its independence on the battlefield, Haiti was forced to surrender a portion of its sovereignty at the negotiating table. In 1825, a French fleet arrived off the coast of Port-au-Prince, not with the intent of a full-scale invasion, but with a brutal ultimatum. The French king, Charles X, presented Haiti with a stark choice: either pay a massive indemnity to the former French slave owners for their lost property, which included the enslaved Haitians themselves, or face a renewed naval blockade and the threat of war. This was not a negotiation, it was state-sponsored blackmail, an act of profound injustice that would shackle the Haitian economy for over a century. The price of this coerced recognition was set at 150 million gold francs, a sum so astronomically large it was 5 times France's annual national budget and roughly 10 times Haiti's entire yearly revenue. It was an impossible demand, designed to cripple the nation. To make the payments even feasible, the debt was later refinanced through French banks in 1838, reduced to 90 million francs, but with high-interest loans that locked Haiti into a vicious cycle of debt. This independence debt was a moral abomination. It forced the children of the revolution to financially compensate their former oppressors for the very freedom they had won with their blood. For decades, a staggering 80% of the Haitian government's budget was diverted to paying this debt and the associated loans, draining the nation of the capital desperately needed for infrastructure, education, healthcare, and economic development. This financial stranglehold systematically impoverished the world's first black republic, stunting its growth and creating a legacy of political instability and foreign intervention as the state struggled to extract resources from its people. The indemnity was the final, triumphant act of French colonial vengeance, a chain of debt that ensured Haiti's revolutionary victory would be burdened by economic servitude for generations to come. Despite the immense price it paid in blood and treasure, and despite the deliberate attempts to isolate and impoverish it, Haiti's very existence resonated across the world as a potent and unyielding beacon of freedom. For enslaved and oppressed people everywhere, the success of the Haitian Revolution was living, breathing proof that the seemingly unshakable edifice of slavery and white supremacy could be torn down. It was a story passed in whispers through the slave quarters of the American South, the plantations of Jamaica and Brazil, and the port cities of the Caribbean. The name Haiti became synonymous with liberation, a testament to the power of collective resistance. The revolution sent a wave of terror through the slave-owning classes of the Americas. In the United States, Southern planters lived in constant fear of a second Haiti, leading to harsher slave codes and violent paranoia. Conversely, for abolitionists on both sides of the Atlantic, black and white, Haiti became a powerful argument. They pointed to the new nation as evidence that enslaved people were not contented children, but human beings who yearned for and were capable of fighting for their liberty. The revolution directly inspired numerous slave revolts, including Gabriel's Rebellion in Virginia in 1800 and Denmark Vesey's Conspiracy in South Carolina in 1822, both of which were deeply influenced by the Haitian example. Furthermore, when Simón Bolívar was driven into exile, it was Haiti that provided him with weapons, supplies, and sanctuary, on the condition he promised to abolish slavery in the Spanish colonies he sought to liberate. In this way, the Haitian Revolution was instrumental in ending slavery in much of South America. Its legacy is the undeniable truth that the fight for universal human rights is a global struggle, and that the desire for freedom is an unstoppable force that can, against all odds, topple empires and change the course of history. The story of the Haitian Revolution does not end with the Declaration of Independence or the Radical Constitution. It is a story that continues to unfold today, its legacy a complex and powerful force shaping the modern nation of Haiti. The unparalleled courage and sacrifice that birthed the first Black Republic were followed by 2 centuries of immense challenges, many of which are deeply rooted in the circumstances of its birth. The crippling independence debt paid to France for over a century drained the national treasury and strangled economic development at its inception. The prolonged diplomatic and economic isolation by the world's powers left Haiti politically and commercially adrift. This difficult start created a fragile foundation, leading to periods of political instability and foreign intervention that have compounded the nation's struggles. Yet, to view Haiti solely through the lens of its challenges is to miss the enduring spirit of its people. The same resilience that defeated Napoleon's armies is visible today in the vibrant art, the profound spirituality, the pulsating rhythm of its music, and the unbreakable will of its citizens who face adversity with a strength forged in history. The revolution bequeathed a powerful sense of national pride and an indomitable belief in freedom and self-determination. Understanding Haiti's present requires an understanding of this revolutionary past. The poverty and political volatility are not a reflection of a people's character, but rather the long shadow of a history marked by external punishment for the audacity of claiming their freedom, and the internal struggles to define a nation after such a traumatic birth. The story of Haiti is a testament to the fact that winning freedom and building a stable, prosperous nation are 2 different, Herculean tasks. The revolution was the glorious, dramatic dawn. The long day of building that followed has been fraught with obstacles, but the spirit of Dessalines, Toussaint, and the countless unnamed heroes still fuels the enduring hope for a future worthy of their sacrifice. The Haitian Revolution stands as one of the most profound and consequential events in human history. It was more than a war, it was a seismic shift in the world's moral and political consciousness. In an age of empires built on bondage, a group of enslaved Africans did the unthinkable. They defeated the armies of France, Britain, and Spain, shattered the system of slavery in their land, and forged the world's first Black Republic. They transformed themselves from property into sovereign citizens, proving that the desire for liberty is a force more powerful than any army. The story of Haiti is the ultimate underdog narrative, a testament to the unyielding power of the human spirit. From the sacred oath at Bois came into the strategic genius of Toussaint Louverture, and from the brutal betrayal that followed to the fierce, uncompromising resolve of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, the revolution was a masterclass in courage, sacrifice, and resilience. It was a declaration, written in blood and fire, that no human being is meant to be a slave. The birth of Haiti sent a shockwave across the globe, terrifying slaveholding powers and igniting the hope of liberation for oppressed people everywhere. Its legacy is a complicated one, of glorious victory followed by 2 centuries of immense struggle, born from the heavy burdens of isolation and a crippling debt imposed for the crime of being free. Yet, through it all, the spirit of 1804 has never been extinguished. It lives on in the culture, the faith, and the indomitable will of the Haitian people. The Haitian Revolution is not a forgotten relic of the past, it is a timeless lesson. It teaches us that freedom is never given, it must be taken. It reminds us that history is not made by kings and generals alone, but by the collective will of those who dare to fight for their humanity. It is an epic of fire, blood, and unbreakable will that forever changed the world.